Hello YouTube, and welcome to another review. It's the Media Preacher here, Michael Gallagher, with a review of some films this time round. I was talking to a friend of mine, Andrew, and I was speaking to him about the channel, and he suggested that it might be a good idea to do some top 5 type lists. And one of the top 5 lists that he suggested was a top 5 list of gangster films. Which really got me thinking, because I love gangster films, I always have. It's one of the reasons myself and Andrew became friends in the first place, way back in the very early 90s. So it seems fitting to do a review or a top 5 list of my favourite gangster films. And as I was looking at my collection, I was sort of struggling to pick 5 films out that really stick at the top of the list, because there are loads of good gangster films, and some of them could easily be on this list if I was in a different mood on another day. And I may even have forgotten about some films that I've seen way back when. So please, in the comments section of this video, please feel free to put in your top 5 gangster films so I can see sort of how you rate them. If you agree with the ones that I've put into the list, and also anything that I might have missed out that I've forgotten about. But there are certainly some notable mentions which I will come to at the end of the video if I remember. Now, the first film in the list is a film that came out in 2006. It stars Leonardo DiCaprio. It stars Matt Damon, and I think it was probably one of those transitional films when Leonardo DiCaprio had gone from being sort of this heartthrob Titanic type character that little girls liked into being a really fledged good actor. And I remember when I first saw that he was starring in this film with this particular director, I was surprised, because at the time he was known for different types of roles. But when I saw the film, I thought it was fantastic. I thought his performance was fantastic. His co-star Matt Damon is fantastic. Also in the film is the legend that is Jack Nicholson, and of course he's fantastic too. He always is. But the film is called The Departed. And as you can see, I have the Blu-ray of it here. It's a brilliant Blu-ray. It's a really good transfer. It was one of the earlier ones, so it's probably not quite as good looking as some of the new Blu-rays that we're getting through now, and some of the remastered issues. I've actually got one of those that I'm going to come to in a second that I can highly recommend to you. But no, this film is fantastic. Essentially, it's a film about the Boston mob. Leonardo DiCaprio is an undercover police officer, and Matt Damon is a police officer who's not undercover but is actually working with the mob. And it's all about how their lives collide, and it leads to some brilliant scenarios and some brilliant scenes between the various characters. With most of these films, if you're young, there's a lot of bad language in it, so be careful of that. But no, it's a really, really good film. I couldn't put it much higher than number 5, and there were lots of other films that could have come in at number 5, but I think it's a worthy entry at number 5. And it of course is directed by the master of the gangster film, namely Martin Scorsese. Of course, he's got his hands all over this, and he gives it the Midas touch, for want of a better word. So yeah, that's number 5. That's The Departed. Moving on to number 4. This is a film that some people may not agree with, and as I say, on other days it may not have made the top 5 list. But it's a film that I really think has very good elements and also some poor elements. It's a great story. It's a film that's based on a true story. The film has some fantastic performances in it by 2 heavyweight actors. And one of those actors is Al Pacino, and the other actor is Johnny Depp. So can you guess what my number 4 film is? I'm sure a lot of you already have. It's Donnie Brasco, which came out, I think, in about 1997, from memory. And it's all about, again, the mob, this time in New York. Al Pacino plays against type, for want of a better word. He plays sort of a down-and-out type, low-level gangster who has spent his whole life trying to get into the higher echelons of the mob, but has never really been able to achieve that. And you see just such a great performance from Al Pacino in this film, and the way he plays the character. Johnny Depp is a police officer who essentially is undercover, and it's his job to try and infiltrate the mob and to try and get information for his bosses. And the film spans over a lot of years, but it shows you how he befriends Al Pacino, a fairly low-level gangster, in order to get to the higher-level gangsters. Really good film, based on a true story, based on a book by a true story, of a true story, sorry, and yeah, it's good. It's flawed, though, and it's flawed because I think the pacing in the film could be better. And also some of the higher level gangsters, like the Michael Madsen character in the film. I don't know if you remember him. He was in lots of gangster type films at the time. He was in Reservoir Dogs, various other films. But he had become, by this point, slightly cartoonish. And his character is a little bit cartoonish in the film. To me, it didn't feel like a brilliant performance from him, and I think as a result of that it lets the rest of the film down. And the film also seems to end very quickly as well. It's almost like it goes on for 2 hours, and it's really well paced, and it's well acted, and it's well written, and then they just want to wrap it up, and it just sort of ends. But interestingly, it shows not only the gangster, but also the effect that it has on the character, on Johnny Depp's character, on the effect on his home life and his wife and his children. Of course, he's not around very much for, because he's busy infiltrating the mob. But at number 4, Donnie Brasco. Definitely recommend seeing it. It's a really, really good movie. Okay. We're getting hard now. We're at number 3, and at number 3 is a film that I think is absolutely fantastic. It didn't do fantastically well on its initial release, but I think it's one of those films that's gone on to have a bigger life on home video formats, originally on VHS. I think it was released on Laserdisc in England as well. I didn't have the Laserdisc of this film, actually. Then it came out on DVD and Blu-ray, and it is a really, really strong, solid film. And again, it's an Al Pacino classic, and it has Al Pacino in sort of the lead role. He wasn't in the lead role in Donnie Brasco, of course, because Donnie Brasco is Johnny Depp. But he is in the lead role in this film, and the film is Carlito's Way, which came out, I think, in 1993. It's directed by Brian De Palma, and it has 2 absolutely fantastic performances in it. The performance from Al Pacino is just a masterclass in performance, in my opinion. And it also has, of course, Sean Penn in the film, who plays this sort of really scuzzy type lawyer, and he plays him so well. You end up hating that character almost immediately as the film starts. You know there's something wrong about the character. But no, it's a great film. It was It was a book, that was written by a man called Edwin Torres, I think in 1979. And the book that it's from was actually called After Hours, which was a sequel to the original book called Carlito's Way. And I actually have a copy of the book here. My friend Andrew, who I was talking about, we were huge fans of these types of films when we were in school, and he had a copy similar to this. I think his copy of the book, his original copy, had that cover on it. But he had both books in one, and he lent me very recently, actually, the second book in the 2, called After Hours. And After Hours was a really interesting book, and it sort of follows the film in many respects. What the film and the book essentially is about, it picks up the character of Carlito Brigante after he's been released from prison. At the end of the first book, he goes to prison, and at the start of the second book, he's released from prison, and he's released on essentially a technicality that his lawyer, the Sean Penn character, is able to expose and get him out of. In the book, they actually go into a bit more detail, and they explain that the Sean Penn character actually isn't a great lawyer, but the Carlito Brigante character has worked very hard on his own case while he's in prison, and he's essentially exposed the loopholes, and then Kleinfeld, the Sean Penn character, has taken credit and responsibility for his hard work. But the film opens with him leaving prison, and wanting to go straight and not wanting to be a gangster anymore. But of course, as soon as he gets out of prison, all of his old associates are on the street in New York, and they all want him to sort of get involved in various dubious activities. He sort of tries his best to keep out of trouble, but there are a few absolutely classic scenes where he gets himself into a lot of trouble. There's a great scene at the start of the film where he goes with a cousin to essentially a drug buy, and his cousin wants to show him off as this great gangster to these people he's buying these drugs from, and the people that he's buying the drugs from try to murder both him and Carlito Brigante, and that ends up in a fairly bloody scene that's so brilliantly directed by Brian De Palma. And I think that Al Pacino's performance, Sean Penn's performance, and then the direction from Brian De Palma make this such a great film. But essentially, Carlito Brigante wants to get out of this criminal life, but he knows that he can't do that without some financing, so he gets involved in this nightclub where he thinks he's going to make enough money to go and to leave New York and go into a legit business, a car rental business. And along the way, this lawyer character, Sean Penn's character, keeps dragging him back into the underworld, and he gets himself embroiled again with some mobster characters who ultimately want to kill him. And there are various other notable performances in the film. The character of Benny Blanco, who is played by, I've forgotten the actor's name off the top of my head, but the character of Benny Blanco is fantastic. Sean Penn's fantastic. Penelope Ann Miller, who plays the love interest, is fantastic, and the story is just a really riveting story. As I said, I do have the book here, and I've read the book After Hours, which is really based on the film. I've also read Carlito's Way, the original book, which was well worth reading too. But I recommend both the film and the book to anybody, and if you like the film, certainly go and try and find the book if you can. I think it's out of print at the moment in England. I picked it up on eBay. My wife bought it for me as a treat before we went on holiday, because I'd enjoyed the book that my friend had lent me so much. But in After Hours, the book, there's all this extra stuff about Kleinfeld and about the internal investigation of him, and there's all this other stuff about his father, who's a judge, and his father's all sort of pulled into this big conspiracy that Kleinfeld's been a part of. And it really is really interesting, and a great book, a great film, and a worthy contender, I think, at number 3 in the list. Moving on now to a film. I don't think that these next two films are going to be massive shocks to anybody, but my second favourite gangster film of all time has to be a film that has recently been re-released on Blu-ray. I think it was 25 years old. It's been put onto Blu-ray in the form of from a 4K scan, and the film, of course, is the brilliant Martin Scorsese epic Goodfellas. And Goodfellas stars Robert De Niro, another absolute master heavyweight in this particular genre, and Ray Liotta, of course, and Joe Pesci. And essentially the central character is the Ray Liotta character, who it tells his story from getting into the mob as a young boy, and then all these awful things happen to him, where by the end of the movie, sort of 10-15 years later, he is in witness protection. And the movie is told through his eyes. And initially, the mob in the first sort of half of the film is to some extent glamorized, because it shows his view of what he viewed the mob to be as a young boy, and all the great things that he had access to as a result of being a member of the mafia. But then it goes on to show the disintegration that happens to the character as a result of his drug habit, as a result of being involved with these people. Ray Liotta's fantastic in it. De Niro gives a really understated performance in it, but it's fantastic. And probably the masterclass performance and the standout performance in this particular movie has to be Joe Pesci, because he is mental. And bearing in mind, at the same time this film came out, he was in Home Alone as like this almost cartoon type character, but he's no cartoon type character in this. I'm sure a lot of you have already seen the film. It's really, really, really fantastic and worth seeing if you've never seen it. And just to note, this new Blu-ray edition, it comes with a beautiful book that tells you all about the film. There are some fantastic pictures in the book about the film. It's got newly commissioned artwork. I actually prefer, I think, the old artwork, and I would have liked to have had the option of the new artwork and the old artwork, which you get with a lot of the new Arrow titles, which I absolutely adore. But then in the film you get 2 discs. On the first disc, of course, you get the feature, and as I've said, it's an all new scan of the movie. It's completely remastered, and it looks absolutely fantastic on a big screen. And then on the second disc, of course, you have the special features. There are some really good special features on this disc. I think one of them is an all-new documentary which features fairly new interviews with the cast, obviously reminiscing about the experience of making the film. And it's fantastic. I mean, it's a true classic. It's a great film, and it certainly is a film. When I'm looking at my favourite gangster films of all time, this normally comes in, I think, at number 2. It's beaten by another film that is a known masterpiece, and I don't think many people would disagree that this is the best gangster film that was ever made by anyone. Goodfellas is also in a league of its own, but this is actually a trilogy of films. It's not one film. If I had to pick one film from the trilogy, I would pick part 2. But the story is a story about family told through a number of decades. And again, there's also a fantastic Blu-ray release of this film, released by Paramount Pictures this time, and of course that's the Godfather trilogy. And it tells the story essentially of the Corleone family and of the higher echelons, if you like, of the mafia. And that's one of the reasons that Donnie Brasco is such an interesting film, because of course by the end of the first part of the Godfather and into the second and part of the third part, Al Pacino is the Don. He is the head of the family. He is the head of the mob. He's in charge of everybody. And Donnie Brasco is interesting because Al Pacino almost plays on that character and is the other end of the mafia. He's one of the lower end type characters. So The Godfather's a fantastic film. Of course, Marlon Brando is in the first instalment of The Godfather and received huge credit for his performance, and his performance is fantastic. But I think that Pacino's performance in this film is massively understated. And when you watch it from the start of the first film, certainly to the end of the second film, there's such a character arch that happens and takes place. It makes it a really, really interesting movie to watch. And we're not talking about violence or people waking up with horses' heads in their beds. All that stuff happens, of course. But it's the character interaction, it's the way that the characters develop within the film that makes it such an interesting piece of cinema. And the performances, particularly I think by Al Pacino in that particular film, and of course in the second part of the film, De Niro, he plays the young Marlon Brando, and he does it so well and so authentically, you really, really buy into it, and you really buy into the fact that he could have been the younger Marlon Brando character. The Blu-ray set on this is absolutely phenomenal. Again, it was a new transfer made for Blu-ray, and the film has never looked better, or none of the films have ever looked better than on this particular set. And the great thing about this set is it's been out for quite a few years now, and so you can pick it up very, very reasonably from most of the high street stores or from Amazon. And it's really, really worth having on Blu-ray. If you've never seen the film, please get the Blu-ray set and watch it. If you only have the Blu-ray set and haven't ever upgraded it, it's a film it's a collection of films that really is well worth upgrading. And I'd ask you to go out and spend your hard-earned money on it, because it's so, so great. And I'm actually looking forward to seeing it again already, just talking about it. So they were my top 5 gangster films. As I say, there are notable omissions, but you can't put everything in. There's a film called Drive with Ryan Gosling that could have made the grade. Reservoir Dogs, of course, is a huge one that could, and maybe even perhaps should have made the grade. Pulp Fiction's a gangster film, isn't it? That's a great film. I almost put Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction, though, not into the gangster genre, but into the Tarantino genre, because they are gangster films, but they are done with such panache and style that you don't tend to think of them as necessarily being gangster films, but of course they are. Tell me what you think about that. I might actually do some spotlight videos on those particular movies in due course. But no, please let me know in the comments what you think your 5 best gangster films are, and if there's anything that I haven't mentioned. I mean, a film like Mean Streets, for instance, could be in the could be in the list. If there's anything you think that I haven't mentioned that's obviously a really classic gangster film and is always not even a classic, perhaps it's just a great movie that was overlooked that I don't even know about, let me know, put it in the comments, and please don't forget to subscribe. So until next time, see you later.